Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic today. Let's do it. What's the most disturbing thing you've heard someone say when they thought no one was listening? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Well, my mom said it to me, but no one else was listening. My first cousin died in a car accident, and my aunt was driving the car. Everyone was very concerned about my aunt. Her husband and my dad were brothers. My mother said, wistfully, "I wish I were your Aunt Dee." I was confused because my aunt had just left and lost her eldest son. I asked my mom, "You wish my brother had died?" My mother laughed at me like it was the silliest thing she ever heard. "Oh, I don't want anyone to die. I just want the attention, tee-hee. Don't be so melodramatic." I was shocked that my aunt had gone through the most traumatic event in her life, and my mother was jealous of the attention she got. Creepy AF. It's just because they want me to conform, an alcoholic mom to her 5-year-old daughter over the phone. This was in response to the situation she was in. Her daughter had been removed from her home. She was due in court and had to start going to treatment for her alcoholism. She definitely did not know I was in the same room supervising the phone call. Like, yes, we all want you to conform to not drunkenly drive around with your kid in the car, you brave little idiot. Just put her in the closet until later. I was in the upstairs bathroom at a party when I overheard 2 guys in the adjacent bedroom talking about a passed-out 18-year-old girl. They were laughing, joking about playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who'd get first. We were on the second floor, far from the crowd, and they'd clearly been drinking. I was scared to confront them directly, but once they left the room, I went in, and sure enough, they'd actually stuffed her in a closet. I ran downstairs and got my brothers and some of their friends, and we got her out of the house safely. I'd lent my car to a coworker, and on the day I was to get my car and keys back, she had me meet her at a pub. She was actually drunk when I arrived and didn't realize it was me she was talking to, and said I can't give her car back. I need it because the judge won't let me have my car without a breathalyzer machine installed. Turns out she had amassed enough DUIs to have her driving privileges revoked, and she was borrowing any car she could for as long as she could to keep driving home drunk from the pub every night. She also offered to buy my car and asked if the registration could be left in my name for a while. No. When I worked as a nurse in the locked inpatient psych unit, we had a guy come in who had been banned from other hospitals for being violent. Because it was night shift, I handled most of his intake alone. I knew his history, but he was polite and helpful. He didn't complain about having his things searched or being in a locked hall. I had him sit to answer questions and take his vitals. The portable blood pressure machine was acting up, and as I was kneeling next to it, I heard him whisper, "No, it's fine. We don't need to hurt her. She's nice and just doing her job." He wasn't talking to me, and I pretended not to hear. I finished up and got out of there. I'll never forget what he said or the way he was smiling. I worked as a clerk at front desk emergency room, so I would take your basic client details after you had seen the triage nurse. Guy sees the triage nurse, comes to me, then sits in the waiting room chair directly opposite me and begins to talk to himself about how he's going to follow me to my car after my shift, hit me over the head, stuff me in his car, drive me out into the desert, and then he sat there very vividly describing how he's going to and murder me. I finished my shift later, looked up, and this massive security guard, Al, was standing by my desk. He walked me to my car for about 2 months. This was about 30 years ago. I was a temp at a health insurance company. I processed claims. I had a lengthy commute, so I arranged to come in an hour later and stay an hour later to avoid rush hour. Anyway, I'm in my cubicle working. The office is practically empty. There was this awful man, Wendell, who was horrible. He had no work ethic and no idea of what appropriate behavior was. I'd witnessed and overheard Wendell sexually harass my coworker Bobby on multiple occasions. Well, Wendell was a couple of cubicle rows away, and I overheard him on a company phone talking to someone who apparently owed him money. He made several graphic physical threats to this person's safety. I don't know if it's about drugs, gambling, loan sharking, or what. Wendell had no idea I was there. The first thing the next morning, I went to my boss and told him everything. I also mentioned that I'd heard and witnessed him sexually harass Bobby, but she was rejecting his advances. I told my boss I was afraid for Bobby's safety because Wendell clearly had no problem using violence to get what he wanted. My boss was horrified, and Wendell was gone ASAP. I'm a social worker, formerly in family law, and I almost always advocated for the return to parent goal, as the foster care system can be brutal. However, I heard a parent yelling to their child's guardian during a Zoom visit about her no-good child molester boyfriend, not because of what he did, but because he cheated on her while she was in treatment. A lot more explicit language was used, and this was with the child present. She acted very calm and positive when I re-entered the room. Overhearing my mother say I wouldn't go anywhere in life, so it's fine if they continue taking advantage of me financially. Haven't spoken in many years since, while overhearing that was very painful to learn my biggest opponent was my mom, who I thought always had my back. It showed me how toxic my environment was, and how much I was actually coping to get by, and by removing myself from that, it had opened many more doors for me. Turns out, when you're not giving every piece of yourself to others who give nothing back, you have the energy to go places in life. I don't know if there's anything more disappointing than hearing a parent, speak negatively or kind of giving up or a sense of hopelessness for their child. And if the child hears that, you can only imagine the ramifications that may have on long-term development, but it's tough to hear. But other stories today, I was happy to see people sticking up for people that were unable to defend themselves, either because they were drugged or they were heavily intoxicated. So there are still great people out there in this world. A piece of otherwise blank printer paper with the shaky words, "I don't have a job. Nothing is written after this." The paper was left on the dining room table, face up, and forgotten. My dad had already moved on to other things. His early onset dementia made this one of the few things I ever saw him write before his ability to write disappeared completely. Out of dark fascination, I kept the paper. This was about 2 years ago. He's still alive and living with us under our full-time care. I dare say he's been happier the less he remembers. Nowadays, he's a curious guy who smiles when he notices us. Even though he has long forgotten our names, he still looks for us. I was standing in line at the ice cream stand with my then-boyfriend and his dad. There was a woman in front of us who had buds in and wasn't paying attention. My ex-boyfriend's dad, being the absolute lady charmer he is, looked at me, scoffed, and said, "How funny would it be if I just beat the shit out of her and ard her," whilst gesturing to the lady in front of us, the one with the earbuds in. The lady running the booth heard and I heard. Nobody else. She looked terrified. And for good reason. I was trying not to freak out. I knew he was a bad person, but I didn't know the extent of it until that moment. That guy. "She's no longer useful to me," said my dad while he was on the phone with my sister. This was after I filed for FMLA from my company and spent 12 weeks without pay, living with my parents who are in another state to help them navigate the healthcare system, make decisions about his surgery and treatment, and research and schedule and drive to attend appointments with oncologists and surgeons following my father's melanoma stage 3C diagnosis. Yes, I understand that you're dealing with a life-threatening diagnosis and a concerning future prognosis, but I gave up 3 months of my life with my husband and daughter and took 3 months out of my career to help you, and now that my time has run out, I'm now no longer useful to you? Not something said, but witnessed and maybe tame compared to others. We have a few outside cats that were feral we took in. They get fed in a shed in the evening. A friend that stayed with us went to feed the cats one dark evening. One of them was not wanting to go into the shed, and friend became frustrated and spit on the cat. Friend didn't know my partner was outside and had just walked up on this happening. My partner was so angry she didn't really address in the moment. That completely altered the way we viewed this person. It was something I said. I was living with a roommate and he was waiting to take me to the airport as I am in a hectic last minute of packing to leave. I was really stressed out, and at the time I had this kind of mantra I would say. It would help calm me down a bit. So I'm dashing around the apartment, grabbing last minute things and making sure things are set up for him to take care of my cats while I'm gone, and I'm repeating over and over, I'm not going to kill anyone, I'm not going to kill anyone. Well, I thought he was waiting in his room, but I suddenly see that he's sitting on the floor by the wall, petting my cat. We had no furniture in our living room. I had no idea he was there and could hear me, and I felt really awkward and embarrassed. I continued going, and he didn't indicate he'd heard anything, but I'm sure he did and is just thinking, what the A very intelligent, very easygoing work colleague who casually described in a horrible detail how he'd like to catch and drown squirrels on his property. He hates squirrels and thinks it's perfectly acceptable to catch them and put them in a container filled with water, then press another container slowly on top, pushing the squirrel under the water till it's dead. I've literally never been more horrified. He was so nonchalant about it too, which just made it worse. My mom said, I don't want to be called grandma, and her actions were even more scorching. She handed back a photo of my children when they were young that I had framed for her. I was a picture of my children under the tree with our dog and cats. You could have had to pry that out of my hands if I were grandma. She did this by my sister and aunt, and I was shocked. She wasn't angry with me as far as I know. She's just cold. When I was about 6 years old, I heard my grandmother speaking to one of her friends on the phone. She was crying. She said, I feel so bad for her, me. Her mother hasn't called to talk to her or even ask how she's doing. I was concerned by an outwardly charming man in the basement of a warehouse at 3 a.m. We were completely alone in that section, a huge rambling old place, and no one used the basement. And he said, while positioned in front of me and the exit, check your phone. No signal, right? I checked my phone to my dismay and increasing panic. There was no signal. He was smirking now. Now try your radio. Nothing, huh? Dead, nothing. I pushed past him, hauling ass for the door, and he grabbed my wrist real tight. I yanked away from him and crashed up the waterlogged, sagging steps, gasping something about needing to get back to work because a truck was coming. Nobody in real life knows about this, but at least it seems people know exactly what he is. Not quite no one listening, but they clearly didn't think I was listening. I, 27 male, had only kinda recently realized I was bisexual and had never done anything about it besides have a crush on a coworker. I still mostly have never done anything about it. I've only dated women. I'm also an R survivor. I was R'd by a girl when I was 18, and it took years to grapple with the fact that's actually what it was. I have panic attacks sometimes when sexy times are happening. Both of these facts are relevant to the story, I promise. I was at a Halloween party a friend threw with a bunch of college folks. I knew about 6 people total, and they were over 25 in attendance. I got really, really hammered, really, really fast. I had like 1.5 drinks of punch, but felt like I drank half a bottle of vodka. Because of how quickly I got drunk and what happened later, I'm fairly sure I was drugged in some way. I ended up downstairs, away from anyone else, except this one guy who was a lot less drunk than me. I started making out with this guy. He was a Marine and dressed in a silly chicken costume, like full-on mascot costume. First boy I ever kissed. He got handsy and started to undo my pants, and I backed out. It was too much for me so fast. He tried to talk me into going out to his car. He said he would S my D. I was starting to get super uncomfortable. A panic attack was beginning, and to top it off, I was barely able to stand. So I went upstairs and laid down on a couch. He hung on me the whole way, trying to convince me to let him me. Anyways, eventually he stopped hanging on me, and I told my friend, the host of the party, that he was being a bit much, but I needed to crash. I drifted into and out of sleep, the kind of partial sleep that only comes when I'm super fucked up and consciousness is clinging to the edge of this cliff for dear life. As I'm mostly unconscious, I hear the man and my friend arguing like raised voices. I open my eyes a little to see them standing next to me, basically standing over me as the man is trying to lift my dead weight up to walk me out of the house. He's saying I agreed to a ride, that he was my ride home, and he was just taking care of me. He said we go way back, and that she could trust him to make sure I got home safe. She knew that was bullshit, and was yelling at him to get the fuck out of her house. I don't recall how that argument ended, but I remember a bit later I was sitting next to her, and she was crying and apologizing to me. So yeah, I narrowly avoided being AR'd by a stranger at a party because I was too drunk to defend myself, and I overheard the arst's pattern. My wife, Quebecois, and I were working in a hospitality town and met another couple from Quebec working there and eventually became friends with them. They were fairly normal, and the four of us got on well enough that we became friends and started hanging outside of work. As I didn't speak much French at the time, we mostly spoke English together. One night we went out to dinner with them and got into the wine. At one point the boyfriend, who was definitely drunk, forgot that my wife was also a native French speaker, leaned over to his girlfriend and loudly whispered in French in her ear that he wanted to kick her in the ass and have my wife clean him off afterwards. Whoa. His girlfriend immediately was aware that my wife was a French speaker, and we got to watch the horror slowly spread over her face as she died inside. Both she and my wife left pissed, while I had to make small talk with the guy until the bill arrived, as I was at this point still unaware of what he had said. The next day, they quit their job, and I heard they moved back home. On a gross but lighter note, well, your career as a hand model is over, muttered by a nice doctor who was stitching me up after an accident in which my hand got caught between my bike and a gravel road. I'd been instructed to lie down and face the other way because it was not pretty. My girlfriend was on that side, trying to keep me distracted, and we were in a busy-ish ER, so I don't think he thought I'd hear. I burst out cry laughing, which I'm sure made him feel great. My career as a hand model ended before it started, but my hand is fully functional and pretty normal looking, all things considered. Thanks to him, I also learned that you can't just Frankenstein sew fingernails back on to protect the nail bed, and that hand and finger injuries can be extra hilarious because sometimes you get so much gauze wrapped like a big novelty baseball mitt and have to keep it elevated above your heart for the first few days so everyone can see. Worked at a parts store for a couple of years. The worst thing I've ever heard from a customer was when I was checking to see if their battery was dead or being overcharged. It was a husband and a wife, and the husband was standing at the driver's door where his wife was seated. She had the window down and they were talking. I was under the hood checking the battery and heard the husband say, "It should blow any minute. Hopefully it'll do it while he's near it." I pretended I didn't hear it and told them I had to run back in to grab a wrench to tighten their battery cable end. Not even 5 minutes of me going inside, the battery blew up. Sounded like a fucking cannon, and battery acid went everywhere on the bright side. And karma coming to them, the acid got all over the husband, and he had to be taken to the hospital for burns. Worked in an industrial plant making heavy equipment, forklifts, man lifts, things like that. I got another job and was riding out the final day or two of my 2 weeks' notice. Each morning we'd have a planning meeting and get our assignments. Everyone was just chatting before the manager got there, and there were 2 black workers beside me. One was complaining how he had to stay late the day before because the manager said he needed to fully complete his work. After a bit of bitching, the other man says, "Just tell someone up front that he called you the N-word. I'll back you up on it." I couldn't believe that these guys would wreck a man's reputation just because he made one of them work. I don't know if they ever went through with it. I hope not. Back in my hometown on leave, a friend went to the local college, invites us to a frat party, went to the bathroom to piss. In one of the stalls, someone puking while 3 guys were arguing about getting her pants down while hearing her struggle. I kicked the one closest to me, who slammed into the stalls. The other 2 scrambled to their feet, but were so drunk were having trouble. I then kept begging me not to tell anyone. They were just teasing her. I picked her up and took her to my parents because she couldn't tell me where she lived. Next morning, she woke up in my childhood bedroom alone and confused. She remembered bits and pieces, but not going to my house. I was the first person, I'm just a civilian, checking up on a younger woman trapped in her car after a huge car crash. All kinds of fluid leaking from the car. She whispered, "Please don't leave me. I can't get out and I can smell the gas." I couldn't really reach her. She was trapped under the barrier on her side of the road and couldn't free her leg. I told her to try and relax so that she would do no further damage to her leg. She asked me to promise her that I would do everything to pull her out no matter what if the car would catch fire. I did promise her that. Luckily, help got there quickly and nothing further happened. 38 years later, I still wonder if I would have had the courage to dive headfirst into a burning car to pull her out. So I worked in an ABA therapy clinic for a while. It was a great experience overall. The company just sucked, and no, we don't abuse kids. But anyway, the one thing that did really bug me was that insurance companies and money-hungry franchised ABA clinics don't like when the kids nap. I don't know why. That's way above me, but they don't. So that meant we'd often try to keep the kids awake as much as we could for the 8 hours they were there. I hated it, and it was a huge reason I left. But that's not the point. One of my supervisors was in a direct session with one of our patients. We worked with 2 to 7-year-olds, and this patient was 2. The patient was getting sleepy because obviously they're 2 and they're working with us all day. The supervisor said, "Okay, let's take you to a new place to play because I can't bill if you're sleeping." I hated that supervisor. My dad was gnarly, and I'm glad he's dead now. When I was about 15, I was up late reading when I heard him drunkenly stumble down the hallway. I hid the book and pretended to be asleep when he opened my door. I heard him say, "I am not attracted to my teenage daughter," as he watched me sleep. To his credit, that was the only thing of that nature that ever happened, and it was only words. Even so, to this day, it makes my skin crawl. I felt so vulnerable. I never told my family because he did so much other heinous shit out in the open, and nobody helped me. So why would this be different? My mom passed away at age 31, bad heart. My dad was overwhelmed with grief from losing her and the responsibility of now trying to raise 3 kids on his own. I'm the oldest at age 10. We spent a night at my grandparents' house a short time after Mom's death. For some reason, I couldn't sleep well that night and got out of bed. I got as far as to where I could hear my dad talking to my grandmother without them seeing me, and overheard my dad talking about thinking of giving up custody of our kids to my mom's oldest sister. My aunt practically was the one who raised my mom and thought of her as her baby. Mom was the baby of 5 kids, so as such, she was exceptionally fond of us 3 kids as well. For me, though, hearing Dad say that was crushing. I just lost my mom, and it sounded like I was about to lose my dad as well, and that he didn't even want us. I went back to bed, scared and nearly in tears. Luckily, Grandma talked him out of it, and instead had us all move in, including Dad, with her and Grandpa. I never ever mentioned to my dad or grandparents what I overheard that night. I used to babysit my neighbor throughout high school, 4 days a week every week. We got very close. This was like a little sister, and I knew her parents well. One day while we were studying at the desk, the mom and grandma were sitting on the couch behind us talking. Then they started using horrible racial slurs. Kids adopted from South America with 100% native genetics. She's essentially black with white parents. She stopped writing mid-sentence then, and I froze. I love the kids. I was in awe. Whispered to her, "Did you hear that?" And she said and whispered, "Yeah. None of what they're saying is true. You know that, right?" She said, "Yeah." When I left, I asked to speak with the mom privately. Chewed her out and said I wouldn't stay and watch her break her daughter's heart, that if I hear that again, I'm gone. I couldn't stop her being that way, but I could stop it for a few hours a day. I was there. She apologized and promised to stop. She did at least when I was around. Poor kid.